So for years, the conversation around multi-gen living was kind of stuck. The desire has been building, the need is real, and it's getting more real with the affordability crisis, with a care crisis for our older population. But the infrastructure, the financing, the zoning, the construction pathways kept getting in the way of what families wanted to do. But that is changing fast. And I think this year feels like the moment that door swings open. This is finally going to open up the possibilities so that the desire and the demand for multi-generational housing is actually going to now be met with fewer restrictions and barriers. So I think we're going to see the market for multi-gen housing just grow tremendously from here on out. Welcome to Home After 50. I'm Julie Ford, and this is a show about reimagining what life can look like in this next chapter. Here we explore home, family, reinvention, and the evolving ways that women after 50 are shaping lives that are meaningful, grounded, and true. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome back to Home After 50. This week, I want to share some information with you about why I think 2026 may really be the tipping point for multi-generational living. And this episode may be a little bit different if you're watching me on YouTube. If you're watching this on video, you may see me look off to my notes, which is not something I usually do. I'm usually just talking directly to you, but I want to share some data and some information about why this year is probably going to be a massive tipping point for multi-generational living, and what that means for all of us who are grappling with this concept of home after 50, about what it means for those of us who are perhaps in the sandwich generation like me, with aging parents, with young adult kids, or you may even still have kids at home. Or what that means for you if you're a little bit older and you're thinking about, what the last maybe 10, 20 years of your life looks like, and contemplating the idea of if that's, if multi-generational living is something that you might want to consider. So here's what caught my attention today. A little bit of data. The first baby boomers are turning 80 this year. This is the silver tsunami that everybody's been talking about for the last 20 years, and now it's here. The 80 plus population is growing at 4.1% a year, and senior housing occupancy is projected at above 91%, which basically means full with a waiting list. Industry insiders are saying out loud that they're still not ready to serve this generation. But here's what I think is interesting. It's not just a supply crisis, it's a values mismatch, because for many older adults, senior living communities are appealing, but for many, they're not. And so even with a lack of supply, we also have in some parts of the population and in some families a lack of desire to live in a community setting like that, and a desire to stay either at home or in some new configuration with families. So I think it's interesting. Today's 80-year-old may not want what's being offered. She may want independence. She may want to be closer to her family. She might not want to be shuffled into a model that might have been built for a different era. Today's aging baby boomers are super independent. Lifestyle is really important, and connection to family is also important. So I think the traditional senior housing model is built on a version of aging that this generation is not quite aligned with sometimes, and the system really hasn't caught up. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some amazing senior living communities out there that have caught on to a new model and a new vision for how to do senior living communities. That is definitely happening out there in the market, but there's not enough in any case. So you all know I've lived in a multi-gen home with my mom for the last 10 plus, we're really close to 11 years now. And it's been a really amazing solution for our family. I've talked about that over and over here on the podcast. And when we made the decision to live together, it wasn't nearly as popular an idea. We were just trying to solve a real problem after my dad died. But in the years since we've moved into our generation, our multi-generational home, every time we bring up the conversation with people, whether my mom's talking to her friends, whether I'm talking to mine, people have become more and more interested in it over the last 10 years. But what happened last year is really remarkable to me. When I started talking about multi-generational living online, my social media went viral. It exploded. I was invited onto national news. I have a national business publication coming to my house next week to do photos for a feature that they're doing on me and my family. So this is becoming more and more a way of living that people want to explore. More than 8,000, we might even be close to 9,000 now. More than 8,000 people have downloaded my free multi-generational living guide. That's just my guide. This will tell you, this is an indication of how interested families are in living this way. So for years, the conversation around multi-gen living was kind of stuck. The desire has been building, the need is real, and it's getting more real with the affordability crisis, with a care crisis for our older population. But the infrastructure, the financing, the zoning, the construction pathways kept getting in the way of what families wanted to do. But that is changing fast. And I think this year feels like the moment that door swings open. Now, here in Massachusetts last year, and I've talked about this before, we had a new we had some new legislation called the Affordable Homes Act that allows for ADUs by right in every city and town across the state. Of course, there's some zoning, that still has to be followed, setbacks and things like that. But it reduced a lot of barriers to the regulation side of ADUs, but it didn't necessarily reduce the barriers to the financing side. However, today, even as I was getting ready to record this podcast, the news is finally here. We knew this product was coming, but it was finally announced today that it's available starting today. Mass Housing and the state of Massachusetts have put together a new financing product specifically for homeowners who want to add an ADU, either a detached ADU, like a backyard bungalow or granny flat or small house, or an attached ADU, and that could be a build out of a basement into an apartment or a garage space or above a garage, or maybe just adding an attached addition to your house. And so this financing is really going to reduce some barriers, because up until now, most people have relied on their home equity to finance an ADU, an accessible dwelling unit. And that sometimes takes the form of taking out a home equity loan on the property that an ADU is being added to, or doing a cash out refinance on a property, or selling one property. So maybe the parents sell their property, take some of that cash from the sale and put that into the build of the new ADU on their kids' property. Or maybe they combine that with their children and buy a new property together that has an ADU somehow involved. But now there's a new product for Massachusetts homeowners that you do have to meet some income. There are some income restrictions to that. This is really for like low and moderate income homeowners who may not have a tremendous amount of equity in their current home, but they're going to be able to access loans. It's a second mortgage product of up to $250,000 for a detached ADU and $150,000 for an attached ADU. And what I don't know a lot about yet, I have to look into it and I'll report back on this, but is that there's also going to be a matching product that I believe might be structured like a grant or like a 0% loan that is actually going to be available for the pre-development work. So this, I think, is important because if you're exploring the idea, getting ready to build an ADU, even if you get the construction financing, there may be some upfront costs of several $1,000s to actually do a feasibility study, to design, to get the property ready, to make sure that it can work, to do the design for the ADU. So I believe there is going to be a additional sort of like matching product that's going to help make that more possible too. So I'll report back on that. But this is exciting because the ADU market nationally is expected to grow 18.6% annually over the next 7 years through 2033. Cities are relaxing owner occupancy rules. Modular construction is cutting costs. Return on investment for ADUs is projected at about 70 to 80%. That's a number I want to dig into a little bit more and share with you. But what's happening in Massachusetts is also happening in states across the country in terms of loosening restrictions and making more creative financing available. And this is finally going to open up the possibilities so that the desire and the demand for multi-generational housing is actually going to now be met with fewer restrictions and barriers. So I think we're going to see the market for multi-gen housing just grow tremendously from here on out. The other thing I want to speak to around this is less on the data side and more on the personal side, but that I think so many of you can relate to. The people leading this transformation in how we see families living together in multi-generational houses are really the women over 50. And there's some reporting out there, some articles I've read that women over 50 are actually also calling 2026 their threshold year. And I love this framing of a threshold. It's not an ending. It's not a waiting room. We're not like looking down the last 30 or 40 years of our life as a downslide. What's really remarkable is that we're choosing how we want to walk into this next stage of life. And that includes, how do I want to age? Where do I want to age? How do I want to build a home that supports my whole life, my aging parents, my growing kids, maybe my grandchildren? What do I want the next 30 years of my life to look like? And how can I design that? Because I just want to say this, and I think it's so important. I think we have an outdated idea of multi-generational living, meaning someone's going to get burdened with all of the weight of the care and the finances that need to be involved with this. I see this a lot on my social media. So I have some people will respond to my social media posts about multi-generational living with so much enthusiasm, excitement, sometimes like a little bit of overwhelm, like, oh my gosh, how do I start this? I'm really interested. And some people have a lot of negative things to say. And, as with everything, people are speaking from their own personal experience. So I always guess that the people who have the negative things to say have had negative experiences, either living in these situations or negative family dynamics that lead them to think this would never work for them. And that is absolutely true. I am the last person that would say that multi-generational living is for everyone. As a matter of fact, I do a lot of work trying to get families to talk about it ahead of time so that they can make sure that it's going to work for them, because I would hate for people to get into a deeply intertwined housing and financial and relationship situation that they hadn't thought through thoroughly and have that fall apart, because that's extremely messy and extremely painful. But I don't think that now in 2026, we need to be thinking about the woman in the middle getting stuck with the burden of all of the care, all of the financial weight, even though we, I think, as the women in the middle, the sandwich gen moms and daughters, do carry a lot of the responsibility and actually most often do step into the leadership role in the family of how are we going to make this happen. At the same time, I think we have an opportunity now to support one another in being the kind of leaders who also care for ourselves. And I think there are enough of us talking about this now that we can do that. I think we have the resources and the support and the community that we're building around this so that we can lead our families into these beautiful and complex multi-generational living situations in a way that still supports our own needs and desires, and forward thinking about how we want our lives to also look and who we want to become and what dreams of ours we want to realize over the next 20, 30, 40, however many more years of our lives we have left. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to kind of get back to the idea of a tipping point or a threshold that we're stepping over, both as women in our 50s and as families considering multi-generational living, and say, this tipping point or threshold, I think there's a lot of momentum here for support. And I hope that I can provide some of that support to you if multi-generational living is something that you're exploring with your family. I'm certainly here for your questions, for feedback and support. Please reach out to me on my website. You can go to juliford.com. I also, as you may know, have my free multi-generational living guide that I've mentioned earlier in the episode. That is on my website, as well as my Multi-Gen Family Toolkit, which is not a free resource, but it's an affordable resource. It's $47. You can download that. It's a 7-part toolkit that goes over so many things that you need to consider when you're planning a multi-gen home. And when you go to my website, you can get a link there and see a video all about it, so you can decide if it's for you. So just go to julieford.com/multi-gen, and all of my multi-gen resources are there if you need them. I will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me today for Home After 50. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of Home After 50. If this episode resonated, please make sure you're following and subscribing so you never miss a thing. And you can find more resources at my website, julieford.com. See you next time.